In the quiet village of Amoya, nestled between rolling hills and dense, whispering forests, lived a girl named Amira. She was 16 years old, with a gentle spirit and a kindness that seemed to radiate from her very being. Her laughter, though soft, carried a melody that could warm the coldest heart, and her voice, when she sang, held a clarity and sweetness that entranced all who heard it. She was small but resilient, her slender frame belying the strength of character that lived within her. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and empathy, and even the animals of the village seemed to sense her gentle nature, approaching her without fear. Music was not just a pastime for Amira, it was a part of her soul, a language through which she expressed joy, sorrow, and every nuanced emotion in between. Umoya itself was a place where tradition and nature existed in harmonious rhythm. Thatched huts lined winding dirt paths, and vibrant gardens and fields flourished in the fertile soil. The village thrived on the cycles of rain, for the harvests were delicate and precious, and the people had long relied on the blessings of nature to sustain their lives. Music and oral storytelling were central to their culture. Every evening, elders would gather children around flickering fires to recite tales of spirits, heroes, and the magic that wove through the land. Songs accompanied rituals for planting and harvest, and the voices of villagers echoed across the hills, creating a living tapestry of sound that honored both the earth and the ancestors. It was in this environment that Amira grew, absorbing both the beauty of the land and the value of community, her own voice becoming a cherished thread in the village's melodic tradition. Amira's family, however, lived under a shadow. Her father, a kind but often absent man, labored in the fields and trusted that the household would maintain itself in his absence. Her stepmother, Igioma, was a woman of sharp mind but a heart clouded by envy. She viewed Amira's musical talents, gentle nature, and growing resilience not with pride but with jealousy, seeing in the girl's abilities a reflection of her own insecurities and perceived shortcomings. The tension in the household was subtle but constant. A narrowed glance here, a sarcastic remark there, the occasional unnecessary chore or scolding, each carefully calibrated to assert dominance and diminish the girl's confidence. Though Amira carried herself with patience and grace, the stepmother's silent schemes simmered beneath the surface, biding their time, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The earliest hints of conflict were almost imperceptible. Igioma would watch Amira sing to the younger children, her face tight with resentment as the villagers smiled and clapped for the girl's melodies. When Amira helped neighbors carry water or tended to the sick, whispers of envy curled in Igioma's mind like a coiled snake, fueling an urgent need to control and suppress the girl's spirit. Small acts of cruelty, denying her extra food, assigning grueling chores, or subtly undermining her contributions, were enough to leave Amira weary but never broken. Even at this early stage, it was clear that the girl's resilience and inner strength made her a force the stepmother could neither ignore nor easily crush. The seeds of tension had been planted, and the stage was set for a story where cruelty, courage, and the unyielding spirit of a young girl would collide in ways that neither the villagers nor Amira herself could yet imagine. From the moment dawn painted the sky with soft hues of gold and rose, Amira's days were filled with endless toil. The stepmother, Igioma, assigned chores with an unyielding hand, often piling task upon task without pause. Amira carried buckets of water from the river, scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, and tended to the gardens in the blazing sun. No effort went unnoticed or unappreciated, only criticized. When she completed a task, Igioma would scoff at the result, pointing out imperfections so trivial they would have seemed laughable to anyone else. The girl's shoulders ached, her hands blistered, and yet she persevered, refusing to let despair claim her entirely. Despite the cruelty, she retained a quiet dignity, completing each task with precision and care, her resolve growing stronger with each passing day. Igioma's envy was a constant, simmering presence. She watched Amira's natural charm and resilience with a bitterness that gnawed at her every thought. When villagers praised Amira's gentle demeanor, her willingness to help the sick or teach younger children, Igioma's heart twisted with resentment. The girl's musical voice, which once filled the small household with melodies, now felt to Igioma like a reminder of her own inadequacies. Every laugh, every note, every kind gesture from Amira seemed to mock the stepmother silently, and she could not bear it. Her jealousy became an obsession, coloring every interaction with sharp words and cold glares, as though she could extinguish Amira's light simply by wishing it gone. Even as the stepmother's cruelty grew, the natural world around the village hinted at the imbalance in ways both subtle and eerie. Villagers whispered of strange occurrences, birds falling silent when Amira passed, winds that shifted unnaturally around the house, and faint musical notes carried in the rustling of leaves that seemed to mimic the girl's own voice. Some murmured that spirits of the forest were watching, warning of dangers that no mortal could yet perceive. Igioma, however, ignored these whispers, dismissing them as superstition or coincidence. She could not fathom that the very forces she sought to manipulate would one day witness the consequences of her actions. Step by step, the stepmother's plotting took shape, her mind devising increasingly cruel schemes. She spent nights pacing the house, thinking of ways to break Amira's spirit entirely. Her ideas ranged from subtle manipulations to overt acts of harm, each carefully calculated to instill fear, submission, and helplessness. She studied old village tales of forbidden magic, learning incantations and rituals whispered to give one power over another, seeking any means to assert her dominance. The cruelty was not impulsive, it was deliberate, meticulous, and relentless, aimed at extinguishing the girl's natural talents and resilience. Each plan seemed more insidious than the last, yet all shared a common purpose: to ensure that Amira would never rise above the oppression of her household. Amira, meanwhile, endured the daily hardships with a spirit that neither stepmother nor circumstance could fully suppress. Though she bore the weight of labor, criticism, and malice, the girl's inner strength grew quietly like the roots of a tree, deep and resilient. She began to notice the faint signs of magic in the world around her: the wind that whispered comforting words, the shadows that seemed to guide her, the rustling leaves that carried her own melodies in echo. These subtle hints became a secret source of hope, a reminder that the cruelty of her stepmother, though formidable, could not destroy the innate power and spirit that lived within her. By the end of each day, the household was left in silence, Amira exhausted but undefeated in spirit, and Igioma consumed by a burning envy that would drive the story toward darker and more dangerous trials. The stage was set, a battle not just of body and circumstance, but of spirit, cunning, and unseen forces that had begun. The day began like any other, with the sun barely cresting the horizon and the village of Amoya stirring awake. But inside the small hut that Amira called home, a darkness hung heavier than the morning fog. Igioma's eyes glinted with a cruel determination, her envy and malice coiling tightly around her heart. Today, she decided, the girl's spirit would be broken completely. No more subtle jabs, no more whispered cruelty. This time she would assert control in the harshest and most irreversible way. Amira went about her chores quietly, unaware of the storm brewing within her stepmother. She carried water to the garden, swept the floors, and tended the animals, each movement precise and graceful despite the constant exhaustion of overwork. Igioma watched from the shadows, her lips tight, calculating. Every small act of kindness from the girl seemed to ignite the fire of jealousy further. And then, without warning, the stepmother's fury manifested. She grabbed Amira, her hands firm and unyielding, and dragged her to the center of the hut. The air felt thicker, charged with tension, as the villagers' distant voices were muffled by the weight of what was about to unfold. The act of cruelty was deliberate and calculated. With a sudden, brutal motion, Igioma twisted and pressed, each strike and manipulation aimed to break the girl's bones. Amira screamed, a sound of pure agony that reverberated through the walls, yet even in her terror, there was a flicker of defiance in her eyes. Pain coursed through her body in waves, bone against bone, muscle and sinew screaming under unnatural pressure. Her world narrowed to the ache and the fire within her, but still, she resisted, fully surrendering to fear. Small sparks of inner strength ignited in her, like embers glowing amidst a consuming blaze. Yet, as the cruelty unfolded, something remarkable began to happen. With each crack and fracture, a faint, melodic vibration emanated from her bones, subtle but unmistakable. It was as if her suffering could not be contained by flesh alone, that the very essence of her being sang in response to the pain. The sound was soft at first, almost imperceptible, blending with the wind outside and the rustling of the trees, but it carried an unmistakable rhythm, a defiance that refused to die. The magic of the village, long whispered in tales and legends, seemed to awaken in response. The animals fell silent, their eyes reflecting the tension within the hut. The river nearby stilled momentarily as though pausing to witness the injustice. Even the air vibrated with the resonance of Amira's resilience. Amira's mind, though clouded by pain, remained clear in its determination not to be wholly dominated. She clenched her fists, gritted her teeth, and drew on the smallest reserves of courage she could summon. Each excruciating moment became a testament to her will. Though her body was battered, her spirit remained unbroken. The faint songs of her bones seemed to encourage her, reminding her that this cruelty, as unbearable as it was, could not destroy the essence of who she was. The stepmother, oblivious to the subtle magic awakening, continued her attacks, expecting submission. But the more she tried to dominate, the more the faint melodies grew in strength. The walls themselves seemed to hum in response, carrying the notes beyond the hut and into the forest, where leaves shivered as if acknowledging the injustice. Even distant birds tilted their heads, listening to the echoes of a pain that had transformed into defiance. The cruelty intended to extinguish Amira's spirit had inadvertently awakened a hidden force within her, a force that whispered of power, resilience, and a destiny that could not be silenced. By the time the stepmother finally released her, Amira lay trembling and broken, yet the faint singing of her bones persisted. The pain was immense, every movement a reminder of the suffering she had endured, but the subtle magic had marked her. Nature itself had responded to her torment, and a promise lingered in the air, that though her body had been harmed, her voice, her spirit, and her resilience would not die. This first awakening, born from the cruelest act, was the seed of power that would one day turn the song of her suffering into a force no darkness could suppress. Life after the breaking of her bones became a daily ordeal for Amira, a relentless rhythm of pain, endurance, and subtle defiance. Each morning she woke to the ache that ran through her body, a constant reminder of the cruelty she had endured. Walking became a trial, every step a negotiation between sheer will and physical limitation. The chores that had once been tiring now demanded extraordinary effort. She carried water from the river, scrubbed floors, and tended to the gardens, all while battling the throbbing pain in her limbs. The stepmother, Igioma, watched with satisfaction, her eyes gleaming as she noticed every struggle and falter. There were no words of comfort, no moments of reprieve, only the persistent reminder that Amira was expected to obey and labor without complaint. Yet amid the sorrow and fear, glimpses of courage and patience flickered within her. Each movement, though arduous, was accompanied by a quiet determination not to surrender completely. She learned to shift her weight carefully, to rest briefly between tasks, and to breathe in a way that eased the sharp edges of pain. Her mind, though often clouded by exhaustion, remained alert and creative. Even in the depths of suffering, she found ways to accomplish her duties and maintain her dignity, refusing to allow the cruelty imposed upon her to fully define her existence. This inner resilience, faint but growing, became a source of strength, a beacon that promised she could endure and perhaps even overcome the darkness that surrounded her. In this crucible of hardship, Amira's connection with the mystical and natural world deepened. The forest, which bordered the village, became a silent companion. Leaves rustled with encouragement when she passed, and the wind carried soft whispers that seemed to comfort her aching bones. Animals appeared more frequently, lingering at her side as if sensing her pain and offering quiet solidarity. Birds perched close, their songs harmonizing faintly with the subtle vibrations that still emanated from her broken bones. Even the rain seemed to respond to her presence, falling gently on her when her spirit wavered, as if nature itself sought to cradle and soothe her suffering. These interactions were subtle yet profound, a quiet affirmation that her pain was witnessed, acknowledged, and in some mysterious way shared by the world around her. Amira's endurance did not go unnoticed by others in the village. A wise elder, Matsi Kofi, observed her quietly from a distance, noting the quiet courage she displayed despite relentless adversity. Though he did not interfere directly, he provided guidance in ways subtle enough to avoid the stepmother's scrutiny, a knowing glance, a small herb left at the doorstep, a whispered word of encouragement carried through the wind. Likewise, a mystical guide in the form of a fox, sleek and bright-eyed, began to appear near her during moments of solitude, offering silent companionship and leading her to places where she could rest and gather her strength. Occasionally, a secret friend among the younger villagers would leave small gifts or messages of hope, gestures that reminded her that she was not entirely alone. These unseen allies became lifelines, sustaining her spirit and subtly reinforcing the idea that resilience and hope could flourish even in the harshest conditions. As the days turned into weeks, Amira's body slowly healed in fragments, though the pain never fully disappeared. Each struggle, each task completed despite the agony, became a testament to her unyielding will. The sorrow that surrounded her life began to coexist with courage, and the fear she felt was tempered by patience and determination. The quiet magic of the forest, the supportive presence of animals, and the guidance of unseen allies formed an invisible web of strength around her, nurturing her spirit even as her body remained fragile. In these moments, Amira began to understand that pain alone could not define her, it could be transformed into resilience, wisdom, and a subtle power that might one day rise to challenge the cruelty that had sought to destroy her. The fusion of her endurance, courage, and connection to the mystical world became the foundation upon which her eventual triumph would be built. Even in silence and suffering, she was slowly learning that her spirit, like a song trapped in her bones, would not be silenced. As the days stretched into weeks, Amira began to notice strange phenomena that she could no longer dismiss as coincidence. Each time she moved, a faint vibration would emanate from her bones, subtle but persistent, like the echo of a song trapped deep within her body. When she shifted her weight or flexed her fingers, the vibration seemed to pulse in rhythmic patterns, resonating as though her very skeleton carried an invisible melody. At first she thought she imagined it, attributing the sensation to lingering pain from the stepmother's cruelty, but the persistence and clarity of the hum told a different story. Her bones, broken and healed by suffering, were singing in a way that was beyond ordinary understanding, a quiet reminder that her spirit had not been fully broken. The world around her began to respond to these new and mysterious vibrations. On days when the pain in her body flared, the wind would shift, rustling leaves with a curious urgency as if whispering in her defense. Trees seemed to bend gently toward her, their branches swaying in rhythm with the faint song emanating from within her. Animals, both domestic and wild, approached with unusual calm and attentiveness, tilting their heads or circling her as though recognizing a hidden signal that only they could perceive. Even the river, which ran silently behind the village, seemed to shimmer with subtle ripples when Amira shifted her weight in pain or closed her eyes and focused on the hum. These were not mere coincidences. The subtle magic of the natural world was awakening in response to her presence and her suffering, an affirmation that her essence had power beyond human comprehension. Amira's awareness of this hidden strength grew gradually. At first, she only noticed it during moments of intense pain or fear, when her body involuntarily responded to the smallest stimuli. But over time she learned to recognize the patterns and rhythms, understanding that the song in her bones was a reflection of her spirit, resilient, unbroken, and deeply connected to the world around her. This realization brought a mixture of awe, hope, and determination. Though her body had been battered and weakened, her inner strength was an unyielding force, quietly building toward something greater, something beyond ordinary human experience. The villagers too began to notice unusual occurrences around Amira, though they could not fully explain them. Whispers spread quietly through the community, some expressing admiration, others suspicion. Children spoke of hearing faint melodies when Amira moved, even when she was silent. Farmers noticed that winds shifted in her presence, or that animals acted strangely calm or attentive when she passed by. Elderly villagers, steeped in the traditions and mystical beliefs of the land, speculated that these were signs of a blessing, or perhaps a portent of powerful magic. Others were cautious, uncertain whether these phenomena were a gift or a curse, a portent of change that might either protect or endanger their village. Amira herself watched these reactions with a mixture of wonder and growing confidence. The magic, subtle yet undeniable, seemed to validate the endurance and courage she had cultivated through months of suffering. It reassured her that the stepmother's attempts to break her had failed in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. Every small vibration, every responsive rustle of leaves, every attentive gaze from the animals reinforced the idea that her spirit, though challenged, remained intact and that her pain had become a conduit for awakening a latent, extraordinary power. Though still cautious and uncertain of the full extent of her abilities, Amira began to experiment quietly. She would shift her weight deliberately, testing the hum of her bones and observing how nature responded. She noted the subtle patterns, the wind's intensity, the sway of branches, and the way birds seemed to listen before taking flight. Each observation reinforced a growing understanding that she was no longer entirely human in the ordinary sense. The essence of magic had begun to intertwine with her own being. By the end of these weeks, the village stood on the cusp of change, unsure whether to fear or celebrate the phenomenon. And Amira, quietly resilient and increasingly aware of her hidden strength, began to sense that the song in her bones was more than an echo of pain. It was a herald of power, a voice that would one day rise to confront the cruelty that had sought to silence her forever. The day Amira uncovered the full depth of her stepmother's cruelty began quietly, with a whisper of wind that seemed to beckon her toward the small, neglected attic at the far end of their hut. Guided by instinct and the subtle hum emanating from her bones, she climbed the creaking stairs, each step testing her fragile limbs, until she reached a dusty chest hidden beneath tattered cloth. Inside, she discovered a collection of objects and writings that revealed the extent of Igioma's wickedness. a diary filled with meticulous records of her jealous thoughts, crude sketches of rituals, and notes detailing plans to harm and control Amira. Each page, yellowed with age, carried the weight of cruelty disguised as calculated necessity, exposing a darkness that had been festering in the household for years. As Amira traced the words with trembling fingers, memories of past abuses flooded back with sharp clarity. The nights when Igioma had confined her to the cold, unlit corner of the hut, the times when chores were deliberately made impossible, the cruel laughter that followed even the smallest mistakes. Each incident formed a pattern, a tapestry of suffering meticulously orchestrated to break her spirit. The diary revealed that her stepmother had studied forbidden magic, learning incantations and charms designed to dominate and silence, and that the previous acts of cruelty had been preparatory steps, meant to weaken her resolve before attempting something far worse. Amira realized with a mixture of horror and awe, that the suffering she had endured was not random but an intentional design, a carefully plotted path toward domination and despair. The weight of this knowledge stirred a complex storm of emotions within her. Sorrow for the innocence stolen, anger at the relentless malice, and a fierce desire for justice intertwined, strengthening the ember of defiance that had begun to glow in her bones. Her body ached, her spirit had been tested, yet she felt a strange empowerment in the clarity of understanding. The cruelty, though immense, could now be named, confronted, and ultimately overcome. The realization sparked a determination. She would not allow the stepmother's schemes to succeed, nor would she allow herself to be defined by the suffering imposed upon her. Even as Amira absorbed the revelations of the diary and artifacts, the world around her began to respond in subtle, mystical ways. Leaves outside rustled in patterns that seemed almost communicative, and the wind whispered soft, encouraging murmurs through the cracks in the walls. The fox, her silent mystical guide, appeared once more, its eyes bright and knowing, leading her to small objects left by unseen allies that hinted at further paths to reclaim her strength. Every element of the natural world seemed to acknowledge her growing awareness, a quiet chorus affirming that she was not alone in this confrontation with cruelty. Meanwhile, Igioma's growing paranoia became palpable. She had begun to notice the subtle vibrations, the songs faintly emanating from Amira's bones, and the strange occurrences in the forest and village. Leaves seemed to shiver in anticipation, animals lingered unusually near the girl, and winds shifted unexpectedly, carrying murmurs that she could neither decipher nor control. The stepmother, accustomed to manipulating those around her, found herself unable to dominate these forces or understand the origin of their influence. Fear began to replace the arrogance that had driven her cruelty, and every act of malice she attempted was met with subtle defiance, both from Amira and the natural world that had begun to side with the girl. By the end of the day, the stage was set for confrontation. Amira now possessed knowledge, awareness, and a growing magical resonance, while the stepmother's fear and paranoia had begun to fracture her previously unassailable control. The balance of power, once entirely in Igioma's hands, had shifted subtly yet irrevocably. Amira, though still physically fragile, carried within her the certainty that cruelty could be met with justice, that pain could transform into strength, and that the song of her bones, once faint and hidden, would soon declare its presence to the world. With the knowledge of her stepmother's cruelty burning in her mind and the faint, persistent song humming from her broken bones, Amira realized that she could no longer remain in the confines of her oppressive home. Her spirit, though tested and resilient, needed space to grow, to transform pain into strength, and to discover the full extent of the magic awakening within her. One quiet night, when the moon hung low and silver in the sky, she slipped silently from the hut, her body aching with every step but her determination stronger than any fear. The village slept under a blanket of stars, unaware that one of their own was about to embark on a journey that would ripple across the land. The path led her first into the dense forest that skirted Amoya, a place whispered about in tales and warnings. Shadows twisted between ancient trees, and the faint glow of fireflies illuminated the narrow trail. At first, the forest seemed threatening, its nocturnal sounds amplified by her heightened senses, but gradually she noticed signs of guidance. Leaves shifted in a deliberate pattern, forming paths and markers that seemed to respond to the vibrations in her bones. A fox, sleek and bright-eyed, emerged from the underbrush, nodding toward her before darting ahead, clearly inviting her to follow. She did, trusting the silent communication of the natural and mystical world that had grown accustomed to her presence. As she ventured deeper, Amira encountered spirits and guardians of the forest, beings that seemed to exist between reality and legend. A tree spirit, ancient and gnarled, spoke in rustling leaves, teaching her how to focus her mind and channel her inner energy. Water sprites appeared at a crystal-clear stream, guiding her through exercises of patience, balance, and controlled breathing, subtly easing the aches in her body while strengthening her resolve. Birds, whose songs had always echoed faintly in her ears, now responded to her thoughts, offering guidance through melody. Each mystical being she met provided lessons not in words, but through gestures, patterns, and the natural rhythm of the world. Slowly she began to understand that the song of her bones was not a mere echo of pain. It was a conduit of power, a language that could be tuned, strengthened, and projected into the world. The journey was not without trials. At times, her bones throbbed with agony, her limbs refused to respond, and the forest seemed to close around her, testing both her courage and patience. She faced illusions that sought to lure her into despair. Visions of herself as frail and powerless, whispers that told her escape was impossible. Yet each challenge was met with quiet resilience. She learned to draw on her inner strength, to let the song resonate through her pain rather than be consumed by it. With each small victory, the faint musical vibrations became stronger, clearer, resonating with the elements around her. The wind, the water, the rustling leaves, and even the distant mountains seemed to hum in harmony with her growing power. While Amira trained and healed, her absence did not go unnoticed. Ijeoma, first dismissive, soon realized the girl had vanished. Panic and fury intertwined in the stepmother's heart, prompting her to summon minions and invoke minor curses designed to hinder and track the girl. Shadows slithered along the forest floor, and enchanted thorns sprung along the path she had taken. Yet the trials Amira had already endured, combined with the growing resonance of her magical song, allowed her to navigate these dangers with a mixture of courage, intuition, and newfound skill. Every trap that sought to restrain her became a lesson in patience, every cursed snare an opportunity to strengthen her connection with the mystical energies around her. Through nights of quiet meditation under starlit skies, days of climbing rugged terrain, and encounters with increasingly complex mystical challenges, Amira's understanding of her own power deepened. The song in her bones became a tool, a shield, and a beacon of resilience. She realized that her pain, once a source of despair, had been transformed into strength and magic. Every fracture, every echoing vibration now held purpose, and she learned to control and amplify it, projecting it outward to communicate, defend, and assert her presence. The forest, the mountains, the rivers, and the skies responded to her mastery, affirming that she had become a force that neither cruelty nor fear could contain. By the end of her arduous journey, Amira emerged not merely healed but transformed. Her body bore the faint scars of suffering, but her spirit radiated strength and her bones hummed a song of power that demanded recognition. She was ready to return, to confront the stepmother, and to let the song she had nurtured rise beyond the shadows of her past. The forest and all its mystical denizens had prepared her, shaping her resilience into something tangible, unstoppable, and alive, a melody that would not only carry her voice but the justice that awaited those who had sought to silence it. The day Amira fully awakened the power within her arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. She had been practicing, channeling the subtle song resonating from her bones, learning to focus it, to let it flow outward instead of keeping it confined within her fragile frame. That morning, as a thin mist hovered over the village and the distant mountains glimmered with the first light of dawn, a tremor passed through her body. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper, then gradually intensified, vibrating through every fiber of her being. Her bones, once symbols of pain, now sang in unison, producing a resonance that seemed to harmonize with the very heartbeat of the earth. The wind responded almost immediately, lifting and swirling in patterns that mirrored the rhythm of her internal song. Trees bent gracefully, their leaves trembling as if applauding her mastery, while the river rippled more rapidly, carrying the vibrations downstream. Birds lifted into the sky in synchronized flight, their wings beating in harmony with the melody emanating from her bones. Even the animals near the village boundaries reacted, their eyes bright with recognition, some letting out calls that blended with the growing music. The entire natural world seemed to lean in, witnessing the first full manifestation of her power. Amira stood in the clearing near the forest edge, trembling with both excitement and residual pain. The sensations coursing through her were overwhelming, yet exhilarating. Each crack in her bones now produced a clear, vibrant tone, no longer faint or hesitant. With a deep breath, she allowed the song to project outward, amplifying it with intent and emotion. As she did, thunder rolled across the distant hills, echoing the melodies from her bones, while flashes of lightning traced arcs across the sky in rhythm with the crescendo of her song. The forest seemed alive with movement. Branches arched, streams danced, and the wind carried her music far beyond the clearing, reaching the ears of the villagers below. Word spread quickly, though the villagers had no understanding of what they were witnessing. Those closest to the field stopped their work, staring in awe as clouds gathered unnaturally, responding to the invisible conductor orchestrating the unfolding symphony. Some watched in fear, unsure if this was a blessing or a curse, while others felt a deep admiration, sensing the presence of a power far greater than themselves. Children ran toward the spectacle, laughing and cheering as the air vibrated with both energy and beauty, while elders whispered ancient names of spirits and forces long forgotten, recalling stories of mystical guardians who could command the elements through song. Igioma, watching from the doorway of the hut she had once ruled with cruelty, was consumed with fury and disbelief. She had attempted for years to dominate and silence Amira, believing her body and spirit were weak enough to be crushed. Yet now, faced with a force she could neither comprehend nor control, she realized her powerlessness. Desperate, she tried to suppress the phenomena with curses, incantations and threats, but each attempt failed. The song emanating from Amira's bones was not only strong, it was alive, an extension of her resilience, anger and determination. Every act of malice Igioma tried to unleash was absorbed, deflected, or amplified by the magic that had grown from Amira's suffering. The climax of the awakening was a breathtaking display. The storm intensified, winds whipping leaves into spirals and rain beginning to fall in precise rhythms, each droplet echoing a note of her song. Thunder rolled, not in random chaos but in harmonic cadence, as if each strike were a drumbeat marking her triumph. Animals gathered near the clearing, seemingly in reverence, and even the distant mountains seemed to hum in response. Amira's eyes, bright and unyielding, reflected the union of pain, power and purpose. In that moment she understood that the song of her bones, born from suffering, had transformed into an instrument of agency and justice, a voice that no cruelty could ever silence. By the end of the day the village would speak of the event for generations. The girl who had endured unimaginable pain now stood as a living conduit of magic, the thunder and wind as her allies, her song resonating across the land. Even Igioma, stripped of control, could only watch in helpless awe, witnessing the true power that resilience, courage and the natural world could manifest when fully harmonized. The day of confrontation arrived with a tense stillness in the air, as though the entire village and surrounding forest held its breath. Amira, strengthened and transformed by her journey, stepped forward with quiet confidence. Her bones, still humming with the magic born of pain and resilience, resonated faintly through the ground, the vibration carrying a subtle warning to any who sought to harm her. The stepmother, Igioma, stood at the center of the hut's courtyard, her eyes narrowed and lips twisted in a mixture of fury and disbelief. She had grown accustomed to controlling every shadow of the girl's existence, yet now she faced a force she could neither dominate nor fully comprehend. Amira approached slowly, her gaze steady. Words were no longer necessary, her presence, her song, and the magic coursing through her bones spoke volumes. As she shifted her weight, the ground beneath her seemed to respond, trembling lightly as if acknowledging the power contained in the girl who had once been broken. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, syncing with the subtle vibrations that emanated from her body. Even the wind carried faint echoes of her melody, intertwining with the whispers of the trees, creating a chorus that filled the courtyard. Igioma, desperate to assert control, unleashed her first trick, a swirling gust of dark wind laced with minor curses meant to disorient and intimidate. But the song of Amira's bones absorbed the energy effortlessly. Each note vibrated in counterpoint to the stepmother's incantations, unraveling the spells before they could take effect. Leaves spun harmlessly around Igioma's feet, and the wind itself shifted direction, whispering against her face in defiance. Amira's cleverness shone through as she used gestures, tilts of her head and controlled movements to direct her magic, turning her song into a shield and a guide that anticipated every attempt at attack. The stepmother tried again, conjuring illusions of pain and fear, seeking to fracture Amira's resolve. Ghostly visions of broken bones and screams danced before her eyes, a cruel attempt to drag her back into helplessness. But Amira, drawing on months of training, harnessed the melody within her bones, amplifying it into a resonant harmony that dispelled the illusions. With each note, the illusions weakened, dissolving into shimmering motes of light that floated away harmlessly. The forest around them seemed to pulse in agreement, every branch and leaf echoing the unyielding truth of her power. Finally, the punishment for Igioma unfolded, not as a product of rage but as a consequence of her own malice. The stepmother's curses, turned inward by the resonance of Amira's song, began to unravel and backfire. Her dark magic recoiled, leaving her momentarily frozen, disoriented, and publicly exposed for the cruelty she had inflicted. The villagers, who had gathered cautiously at the edges of the courtyard, watched in awe and fear as the stepmother stumbled, her arrogance stripped away, revealing the vulnerability beneath. Some felt a pang of justice, others a shiver of fear, recognizing the extraordinary power Amira now wielded. Even in victory, Amira's response was measured and wise. She did not destroy her stepmother, nor did she humiliate her beyond what the natural consequence of her own magic had imposed. Instead, she allowed the stepmother to retreat, banished from exerting influence over the village, while ensuring that the harm she had caused could no longer continue. This act of mercy, combined with the undeniable display of magical strength, demonstrated not only power but also moral wisdom. It showed that true justice need not be rooted in vengeance. It could be firm, righteous, and compassionate all at once. As the confrontation ended, the storm that had mirrored the struggle gradually softened, thunder rolling gently across the hills while rain nourished the fields. The villagers, once fearful, now approached Amira with awe and reverence. Children imitated the movements of her gestures, elders whispered praises of resilience and wisdom, and the animals of the forest lingered nearby, witnessing the resolution. The song of her bones, once a quiet echo of suffering, had become a triumphant melody of justice, courage, and moral strength, a testament to the girl who had endured unimaginable cruelty and emerged not only victorious but transformed. In the days following her triumphant confrontation with the stepmother, Amira felt the full weight of her transformation settle into her body and spirit. The lingering aches from her broken bones gradually subsided, replaced by a deep, resonant strength that radiated from within. Though faint traces of the fractures remained, they no longer represented pain or limitation. They were now infused with a subtle magic humming softly beneath her skin, a permanent reminder of her endurance and the song that had carried her through suffering. Every step she took resonated with the rhythm of her inner power, and she moved with a confidence born of trials overcome and injustices confronted. Her physical recovery mirrored her emotional restoration, as sorrow gave way to pride, and fear dissolved into courage. The village, once quiet and burdened by fear and uncertainty, slowly began to bloom with renewed life. Crops that had faltered under neglect or harsh seasons seemed to respond to the lingering magic Amira carried, growing taller, greener, and more resilient. Rivers ran clearer, and the wind seemed to carry her melodies into every corner of the fields and forests. Villagers gathered in small groups, whispering in awe of the changes that had taken place. Children mimicked the gestures and rhythms of her song, learning to recognize the power of harmony with the natural world, while elders shared stories of her bravery and the mystical phenomena that had unfolded, ensuring that her tale would endure through generations. Music returned to the village in a new form, intertwined with the vibrations from her magical bones, and festivals that had long been subdued by hardship now thrived in celebration of renewal. Amira herself became a respected figure of both the tangible and mystical realms. She was sought out not only for her wisdom and courage but also for her deep understanding of the hidden currents of the natural world. Villagers came to her for guidance, seeking remedies for ailments, advice for navigating hardships, or simply the comforting presence of someone who had endured suffering without losing her integrity. She taught the children to listen to the subtle messages of the wind, to observe the forest with attentive eyes, and to recognize the strength within themselves that could emerge in times of trial. Her songs, carried in part by her bones, became a bridge between the mystical and the mundane, a reminder that even the smallest spark of resilience could ripple outward to touch an entire community. Through her restoration, the lessons of her journey became ever clearer. She had endured cruelty, betrayal, and pain, yet each trial had revealed a deeper truth. Resilience could not be taken, courage could not be extinguished, and inner strength was a force as potent as any magic. The stepmother's malice, once seemingly insurmountable, had been transformed into an opportunity for growth, demonstrating the natural balance of justice and the inevitability of consequences for cruelty. Amira's experience underscored that true power was not merely in physical strength or magical ability but in the combination of compassion, wisdom, and moral integrity. Her presence in the village was a living testament to the transformative power of adversity. She walked through the streets with a gentle authority, her eyes reflecting both empathy and a quiet, unshakable confidence. Villagers who once feared her stepmother now looked to Amira as a protector and guide, someone whose very existence reminded them that injustice could be confronted and that hope could persist even in the darkest moments. Her magical song, once a hidden echo of suffering, became a celebrated harmony, accompanying festivals, communal work and rituals that honored the land and its spirits. The once oppressive weight of the stepmother's tyranny had been replaced with a vibrant energy that touched every corner of the village, from the smallest stream to the tallest tree, and even the songs of the birds seemed to resonate with her enduring melody. By the time the first full moon after her return rose high in the sky, Amira's transformation was complete. She had reclaimed her body, healed her spirit, and strengthened her connection to the mystical currents that flowed through the world. The village thrived not just because of her magic but because of the example she had set, showing that endurance, courage and wisdom could reshape reality itself. And though her bones retained their faint, magical resonance, it was no longer a symbol of pain, but of triumph, a song that would echo for generations as a reminder of resilience, justice, and the power of a spirit that refused to be broken.